So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the second tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Tzahelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end as per Yeshayahu the prophet. We find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the Aurum feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Mashiach laid waste for many centuries. Reading from Yeshayahu the prophet, it's very important establishing a few understandings from this great prophet, because truly, firstly, this prophet was murdered. However, his writings remain, and very importantly, though the nation did not understand what he was saying mostly, yet his writings, when we read, we find then a few considerations regarding the merchants of the earth and the importance of taxes. Now that's when the whole situation becomes very dangerous. Now then, today, China has done it again, and this very important news regarding then China is becoming itself the car maker powerhouse. So either electric cars or combustion engine or any kind of area of vehicles, they want to become a powerhouse for the production of cars. Now then, the very day before, China then is overhauling its economic laws. So truly, the standards of the Kingdom of the East, as per the structuring of these particular understandings of the prophet, and quite frankly, no person can deviate from these holy instructions, because the information was not yet given. Now then, this might be a bit strange, yet people are bound to hear of wars and rumors of wars, yet the information not revealed. So the way the Hebrew script works is as if you understand that the past is in front of you, then you understand the future. Now for some people it's a bit strange, because they do not have the culture of the instructions or the writings of the great prophets. But that's the way it works. As long as we understand the past, then we have the future in front of us. Now, taxation is a very hot topic, because not only the trade of the time of the end relates directly with the proper taxation, and the prophet Yohanan, when he was writing a portion of these instructions, because a lot of these were already given by the prophets previously, so there is not truly a great contribution that these Shaliach has spending his time writing, because mostly the prophets before him already gave the information. In fact, some of the information in Revelation is a pure fabrication. If you understand the content of the prophets, a lot of the information in the Revelation simply does not line up with the prophets previously, so then obviously is a fact of great concern. Now, the proper understanding of reading the 8th chapter of Revelation explains then and the merchants of the earth. Now then, the content of Revelation when it comes to trade does not mention truly nations or kingdoms very often. But the whole section of trade is related then not nations, not system of nations, but traders, or then merchants, freighters. So then, why then the third part of the ships? Now it's a very important section of these revelation, because if you are describing the end, there is no reason for mentioning an area of the ocean that is destroyed. If an area of the earth is destroyed, is destroyed. Most often when people they write some sort of report, rarely you find situations related with instructions when you are describing a destruction and then you mention and then the third part of the ships. Now it's a very interesting quote-unquote coincidence of describing the third part of the sea, of the ocean and the creatures. And then you find the third part of the ships. Now then, some of these information, it's only given because of the combat of the end, or the autumn feast. Now why then the prophet, when he wrote, he spoke of merchants? Now we find also the merchants on the 23rd chapter of Yeshaya. And why then the prophet's explaining merchants? And merchants, it no longer describes nations. So then culture plays a great deal regarding the understanding of the prophecies. Now the merchants of the earth, obviously, they are very much focused because of gathering of taxes. It's the only reason why they were mentioned. Now then, when people they don't spend time reading the instructions, or then there are always excuses, either because worked a lot, didn't have time, or had kids to take care of, or then went to some place, went to the park, or then was washing dishes, was building a barn, or somebody got in a relationship, or this and that and the other. There are thousands of excuses. However, the holy instructions, they were meant, firstly, his people only would understand. The instructions from the divine was not meant for Gentiles. These instructions were meant for his people. Now the Gentiles were included, but the understanding of the scripture was meant to be given by his own people. So that's why so many people trying to explain the holy instructions and come up with the craziest ideas. Some people including the First World War, Second World War. Some people include the atomic bomb on 45, for instance. And quite honestly, they have no clue what they are saying, because they are not part of the culture that gave the instructions. Now then, taxation is extremely important because Daniel the prophet explained already what then Yeshaya had explained, or then Yirmiyah, both of them, and Daniel knew that there was a link with the prophets before, because as he was then perceiving that the 70 years of activity or then captivity was then drawing to an end, he didn't understand that it was a transition that was taking place. Now that's what's going on in our world at the moment. We are going through a transitional time. Now some people have a tendency of going backwards of what it was. Some people, they have a tendency of going forward. Some people want to be in the center of it. Some people have no clue what they want. But our era is a digital era. The portion of history that was never experienced before. This section of the period of the Restoration and the Autumn Feast, the world had never under any condition had a smidge of this period of time. This period is completely new. Now then, Asia, China, for instance, they are prepared for it. They are the vanguard of the new system. And the rest of the nations, some of them don't care. Some of them simply don't believe that the system would become so advanced. Virtual systems become so complicated, so vast, then they decided to ignore it and only lubricate the printing money machine. But in any form or fashion of purchases, a lot of them are made via online. So then Daniel is explaining sections of the 11th chapter, 12th chapter, and he's pointing a very important and significant point of taxation. Now then, Daniel was the minister of finances. He was very influential. And he was explaining portions of these instructions that primarily deals with the portion of the world related with the increasing of knowledge. Now then, it's very interesting, because in the 11th chapter of Daniel there is the false covenant and there is the real covenant. Now then, later on in the 39th verse explains an alien divinity and linked up with this alien divinity, increasing of knowledge. Now then, people have a tendency every time they are reading the scripture, because chapter 38 is before chapter 39. Therefore, the chronological order of the contents are obviously 38 first and 39 first. When reading the instructions, at least from the Hebrew perspective, is not in chronological order. Absolutely not. So then, as an example, This alien divinity and increasing of knowledge is obviously explaining the divine portion of understanding of the trade of the kingdom of the East. There is no other portion so important, no other religion so important in this world linked up with trade. Not only talking of religion, the only portion of the world that can link trade and religion is the kingdom of China. There is no other. Now then, after establishing that this knowledge would increase, when we think of China, do we think of China in the medical terms? No. When we think of China, we are thinking of primarily trade. Increasing of knowledge for the purposes of trade. That's what the focus is of this particular section, this layer of understanding. Now, people have other opinions. People, they can give their opinion, but doesn't line up with instructions. That's the problem. It's only their opinion. Now then, if your opinion is the proper opinion, where do you link this with the prophets? And then churches again going around teaching junky scripture. Increasing of knowledge is directly related with the foreign divinity related with the kingdom of China. That's what this layer is explaining. A leader of trade, that's what it is describing. It does not mean that we will have other increases of knowledges in other areas. But for the purposes of understanding the prophecy related with this particular layer, the kingdom of the East, China. The understanding of China is trade, and the trade and religion of China is this alien divinity. Now then, because of the intricacies of this particular portion that plays then a very important role when they're understanding the prophecies of Revelation, mostly related with the 8th chapter, find in the kingdom of the East and the ships, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. Now then, 8th chapter explains sections of these particular understandings of Revelation. And again, this scripture is for his people. It doesn't relate to the Gentile world, because the Gentile world, mostly they don't study the instructions. Now if they don't study the instructions, they don't have any opinion. And if they have any opinion, it's not relevant. Because they always have excuses not to read the instructions. So then, the third part of the ships. And then it's talking of in the creatures of the sea, and then the third part of the ships were then destroyed. So then the 8th chapter and the 9th verse, speaking of the destruction of the ships. Now then, taxation is then given in a certain way. So then, these taxes related with the system, and obviously the government is very far behind charging taxes. They can barely get a hold of what then people are buying online. And if the situation relates with a non-centralized monetary systems, the government has absolutely no clue how they should handle these particular situations, because simply they don't place any value regarding the instructions, and because of the intricacies of the new system and the packages that China is making for other undeveloped nations, obviously is linked up with crude or fuel, and then materials, and not only this, but then the money involved for infrastructuring. Now then, why paying taxes is so important? Can simply the nation print out more money? Now comes the whole problem. The United States, unfortunately, its system is weakening because a lot of nations in the world, they are no longer using the USD or the American money as a means of international exchange. So every time a nation purchases the USD, they are no longer charging for a percentage of the deal. Now then, the taxation basis, it's not only stipulating a certain amount of money they should be charging, is the constant flow of taxes via a flexible network. So since this area is extremely neglected in our country, what can we expect when the Chinese system is then launched? Many people don't even have a clue because they simply don't care. They don't read. They don't explore what's going on worldwide, because firstly, they don't value the past of this country. Second, most people, they hate the military. Third, when they simply read what's going on in the government, they shut down their TVs. So then, becoming an ostrich, they stick their head in the sand and expecting the world to change. Quite amazing, and they get themselves confounded thinking they have liberty. That doesn't sound a whole lot more liberty that should come out of this. They are simply becoming alienated from the world's events, and they themselves thinking only because they do not want to know, they get confused by the name liberty. So taxation for the moment is extremely important, because the future of our nation depends of the importance of precisely charging taxes for every virtual transaction done in the system. Now then, whatsoever has value and it's made a trade out of it, being merchandised, you can buy in a box, or being directly online. It's a product that was made somehow and it was delivered and sold. So I'm going to explore more of these the next time. Please stay tuned, much more coming up.